Hey, what's up guys? Welcome back to Drums and Drams. My name's Cameron, and today I'm gonna be taking a look at the second release of Raconteur Rye whiskey. Now this product is a collaboration between the Woodwork Collective and David Jennings, also known as Rarebird 101. And before we go any further into today's video, before I give you the stats and the tasting notes and all that good stuff, I do wanna be very clear that this batch number 2, as well as batch number 1, which I'm gonna be using for a quick comparison at the end of this video, both of these bottles were given to me for free, donated to the channel by Rarebird 101. So first and foremost, I wanna say thank you for allowing me this opportunity to taste and review these bottles, in particular batch number 2. But for those of you watching this video and you're trying to get an idea of the flavor profile, should you spend the money on this bottle, you should take everything I say today with a grain of salt. When anything exchanges hands like this, media samples, full bottles in this case, you should be skeptical. Taste for yourself when you can. I'm not trying to lecture you or anything. And as much as I can tell you that I'm gonna be 100% honest in this review, you might not believe that, and that's the natural and probably good thing to do as a whiskey consumer, excuse me. So with that disclaimer out of the way, let's dive into this batch number 2, which I'm very excited about. I've sampled this out to a lot of people. I've had a couple of sit downs with this bottle and I've gotten into the profile. I think it's changed quite a bit actually with air, and I think that's because of the components in this whiskey. So let's talk about what's going on here. This is a 7-year-old rye whiskey with 3 different components. It's bottled at 122.72 proof or 61.36% ABV. Now all 3 components, all 3 are 7-year-old rye whiskeys from MGP 95.5 mash bill. The first component is just that, straight up 95.5 rye, 7 years old. The second component is that same rye then finished in a toasted barrel. And the third component then is again that same 7-year-old rye, but put into a Mizunara oak cask. So once those 3 components are blended together in an undisclosed percentage or proportions, we don't really know what that is. I'm sure that's a proprietary thing. That blend was then put back into Mizunara casks that previously held 17-year-old Kentucky straight bourbon whiskey. So they are used casks, but they held some pretty old stuff before they were used for this blend. And also using additional oak, like that toasted barrel, like Mizunara, I do find that when you have those things in a blend, once you open those bottles and get some air into the bottle, some air time, I do find that those things change and they do kind of settle, I would say. That's the best way I think I could put it. Let's get into the nose here and see what we get. Let's see what this blend from Rarebird is like. All right, here we go. All right, so I'm gonna start by giving you a couple of broad words or broad descriptors for the profile of this whiskey. The first one that I can think of is robust. This is a super robust, intense, kind of gripping whiskey on the nose. One of my favorite notes all time in any whiskey, whether it's bourbon, rye, it does not matter, is a cola note. That could be Dr. Pepper, it could be Coke, it could be cherry Coke, it could be cream soda, root beer, it doesn't matter. Any kind of cola note in a whiskey is like my favorite thing ever. And this has what I call a funky cream soda note on the nose. Yes, there's a little bit of root beer in the background too, like this root beer float thing, but funky cream soda is the best way that I can describe it. And this has it. It's a hallmark, in my opinion, of really, really solid MGP bourbon or rye. This 7-year-old rye has it. So first impression of the nose, very intense, very robust. It's dark toned, I would say. There's not a lot of light, light aromas coming out of the glass. And that's, for me, a good thing when I think about a $130 bottle of 7-year rye. That's, a little bit of a disparity on paper, I would say. I mean, that price point is up there for a 7-year-old product. And so when this hits you on the nose with a first impression like this, I think that's a really good sign. All right, so let's talk about some other notes in here now. Let's kind of start light and then end up going dark. There's a really nice menthol note that sits on the top of the glass with just a tinge of this kind of spearmint quality as well. That blends nicely with that funky cream soda note that I talked about. I also do find like a ginger note in here. And there is some citrus, which is common with rye whiskeys, but this is a little bit of a different citrus. It feels richer, maybe a little bit more toasty, if that makes sense. So not only do I get kind of like this toasted bread note almost, toasted rye bread would probably be a great way to describe that, right? But I also get this like burnt orange, when you make a cocktail and they use a little torch on the orange slice, that kind of a note is in here as well. I do find a little bit of lemongrass too, as we're talking about citrus here. And then just underneath all of that, I do pick up some of those root beer notes, as well as like, I'm gonna stay in the soda world and I'm gonna say ginger ale on this. So by and large, this is a deep, dark, rich, very robust 7-year-old rye whiskey. I think it defies its age, which it really needs to, given the price point. So checking a lot of boxes here for me, at least on the nose. And just the spice profile on here, I mean, we're gonna compare it to batch number 1 here in just a second, but it feels spicier, maybe a little bit more peppery as well than batch 1. So all good things. Let's go to the palate now and see what we get. Cheers. So I'm gonna do my best here with this whiskey on the palate. The first sip is crazy intense. Titling this batch Brazen makes a lot of sense to me because it's gripping, it's brash, it's bold, it's in your face. It's not uncomfortable, but it is extremely spicy, I would say, on the front of the palate. It has a lot of these, again, these cola notes that are kind of enveloping the entire experience, those root beers, those ginger ales, that funky cream soda. But I think on the palate, I do get a little bit more of this effervescent, candied, but also sweet and decadent citrus profile, leaning a little more towards like the orange side of things. So that's kind of what grips me up front, is this very intense, maybe even a little like eucalyptus-y kind of sensation at the front of the palate with that menthol and that little bit of spearmint. It rolls back, it kind of starts to broaden a little bit, but still effervescent, still a little bit prickly on the palate with those citrus notes. And then as it rolls into the mid palate, transitions into the finish, that's where it really, really opens up into those kind of, I refer to these not only as like these cola notes and soda notes, but also this brown buttery kind of profile. You get into that little bit of toastiness on the back end as well. It's a great long finish on this product. So like the first sip of this, I have goosebumps right now. It's very, very intense. And I think for some people who tasted batch 1, which again, I can't wait for this comparison now. Batch 1 feels to me, you know, to my memory, right? A little more reserved, like you can sit back and relax. This is not a relaxing pour. This is a, you know, get your attention kind of pour, I would say, for batch number 2. So let's go back, one more sip here on the palate, then we're gonna do this comparison side by side. Yeah, look guys, even on the second sip, this whiskey maintains its intensity. I think the title for this batch Brazen absolutely makes sense. This is gonna be a great pour for those folks who like really spicy whiskeys that are gonna hold your attention, kind of a proofier experience. I think, you know, at 122 proof or so, I think this might even drink a little bit over that, which in this case is a good thing because it feels like bang for your buck. It's not a cheap bottle, but I do wanna say one thing here, that this whiskey was in a blind flight recently when I was over on the Bourbon Junkies channel, kind of guest co-hosting while Dan was sick. So Sean and I shot an 8-pour rye whiskey blind flight of some of the best rye whiskeys that we've had in recent memory. And this bottle, while it did get 4th place in the video, by the points it actually should have been in 3rd. We screwed up in the tally. And so it would have been 3rd place at minimum before we kind of re-ranked our top 3. This was holding its own against 11-year ryes, against hazmat ryes, single barrel picks, some of the best barrels that I've tasted. And so it's a good sign. At 130 bucks, I think this is absolutely worth the money. So for me, this is a highly recommended batch. Just the way that it envelops the palate with those cola notes, which is not a common thing for a 7-year-old MGP rye. And then to have the complexity and the effervescence of those citrus notes, a great balance of like mintiness, but not overdone by any means, which is very important to me. I don't like it to smack you in the face. I just think this thing hits way above its weight class. Hats off to the Woodwork Collective and to Rarebird for putting this thing together. But now it's time for a very fun comparison between batch 1 and batch 2 here. I'm actually gonna pour a little bit more of this batch 2 just to kind of even out the glasses. I do find that when I'm doing side-by-side comparisons, if you have vastly different fill levels in your glasses, the noses come off a little bit different and the entire experience feels just a little bit disjunct, I would say. So let's get into this now. And by the way, shameless plug, if you do decide to pick up this Raconteur Batch 2 on bourbonoutfitter.com, I do finally have an affiliate code, a code to enter at checkout, which is just CAM, all caps, C-A-M. You get 5% off. It helps the channel out, helps keep the lights on and keep these reviews rolling. Let's go on to batch 1 now and see how these things compare. Yeah, right away. Batch number 1, I get kind of like this, almost like Neapolitan ice cream. Like you can get like this strawberry vanilla, creamy milkshake kind of quality to it on the nose. But also I think in batch 1, one note that I may not have picked up on when I tasted this on a live stream a few months ago is this really like candied grape note, a la Buffalo Trace, that's kind of in the background of this whiskey. But by and large, it's coming off much sweeter, much more relaxed, much more dessert-like and decadent. Whereas this batch number 2, Yeah, I mean, this is just, this just smacks you in the face with spice and those brown buttery cola notes, more effervescent. And still, I'm gonna come back to that like kind of toasted bread, toasted rye bread note that's in here. Baked goods, you know, whatever you wanna call it. Those things differentiate it from batch one. It's funny that both of these have the same components because they couldn't be more different. And I think, again, the airtime in the bottles helps to evolve these whiskeys. They do develop with air. And so this is a pretty cool comparison here. So let's now go to batch one on the palate and see how it compares to batch two. All right, so batch one still has a little bit of that effervescence to it, but I think it's a little bit brighter, I would say. Like, not only is this sweeter all the way around, but this effervescent and peppery quality that I get on the palate, it's a little less rich, a little brighter, a little more of like a white pepper spice as opposed to maybe more of an aromatic oak spice coming out of batch number two. So now back to batch two for one final sip here. Oh man. I mean, look, batch one is great. I love it for a completely different reason, but batch two is so up my alley. And I know people might say, you got this for free, you're hyping it up. Totally understand. Again, please take everything I say in this video with a grain of salt. But I think this batch number two is phenomenal. 130 on paper for a 7-year rye whiskey makes 0 sense. I've just got to come out and say it. Then you taste this whiskey. That's why reviews exist, because, you know, it lives up to that price point. It's pretty freaking crazy stuff. I would absolutely mistake this for an 11, 12-year-old rye whiskey in a blind flight, and I have done that. So there you go, guys. That's the review. Highly recommended. Hats off to the Woodwork Collective, to David Jennings, Rarebird 101 for this collaboration. I hope they keep it going. Can't wait to see what comes out next. Let me know if you guys have tried batch number two and what you think. Like, comment, subscribe, check out the Patreon for some barrel picks, exclusive content, and check out the YouTube memberships in the description of this video. $2.99 a month. You get some fun emojis, you get some exclusive content there as well. So that's gonna do it, guys. Cheers, and I'll see you next time here on Drums and Drams.